Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. This episode is brought to you by Offscreen. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is nobody today. In fact, Federico is off on vacation, getting a little well-deserved R&R after WWDC. He's at the beach, and he'll be back next week. So I thought I would try something brand new, which is just doing this show solo, off the cuff. You know, it was actually a pretty quiet week at MacStories because there wasn't a whole lot of news going on, at least the first half of the week. But towards the end, on Thursday, we got the betas, the public betas, for iOS 14, iPadOS 14, and tvOS 14. It looks like Big Sur and watchOS 7 will be coming a little bit later, though those public betas will be coming soon too. And it's notable that watchOS 7 is included because watchOS has not been part of the public beta in the past. So in conjunction with that going out, of course, we had a news story explaining that the betas were out. But Federico and I both did stories going over the whole thing. You know, Federico had a great story called 2 Weeks with iPadOS 14, redefining the modern iPad experience. And it really, what I like about it is that this is a story where Federico picked up where he left off with his iOS and iPadOS 13 review, picking up on some of those themes and talking a little bit about how those were reflected in iPadOS 14 this year. These are his initial thoughts. He's still developing them. You know, the full-blown thing will be part of his review in the fall, but there are a lot of interesting insights here about his first 2 weeks using iPadOS. And then I did a different story. Mine was about widgets and the app library, which it was really fun to do because when I went into using widgets, I was very skeptical of using them on my home screen because they take up a lot of space. The smallest widget takes up a 4x4 app grid, and the mediums take up 8, and the larger ones take up 16. And that's a lot of space. And I've got a lot of apps on my home screen, and I use them pretty much every day. So I wasn't sure whether I'd be willing to put them, especially on my first home screen. But what I ended up doing was I ended up using a small widget stack and a medium-sized widget stack, both on my first home screen. And although I eliminated a total of 12 app icon spots, I use 13 at the moment, 13 different widgets for a variety of things. And really my favorite ones so far are the Photos widget because it surfaces photos that I haven't seen in an incredibly long time. I'm just not a person who goes through and scrolls through my photos very often. And having them just kind of appear throughout the day with having the smart rotate feature turned on for widgets is fantastic. Oftentimes it's like, you know, a year ago today or 2 years ago today. And recently I saw, you know, some photos from a wedding I went to a couple of years ago. I had another one, you know, I got the beta installed during WWDC. So I also saw pictures from past WWDCs and summers and things like that. And I've really enjoyed that. Another widget that I like a lot is the music one, which is a recently played widget. And what's neat about widgets, that one and especially that one and the notes one are good examples of deep linking. Developers have had the ability to use universal links to link into specific views and to specific content in their apps for quite a while. But this is an example of one use of that. So for instance, with the music app and the recently played widget, you have on the medium one, which is the one I'm using, you have a grid of all of your recently played albums and playlists and so forth. So you tap on any one of those and it'll take you directly to that album or playlist. One of the limitations on widgets now is that they're not as interactive. You can't have buttons and text input and things like, for instance, I don't think the timers would be possible, or the calculator that pcalc does as a widget. I don't think those would be possible under these new widgets. However, there is interactivity in the sense that you can have multiple targets within a widget that take you to different locations within an app. So that's what music is doing. And the notes one is another good example because I have a scratchpad note that I have as a widget, a small widget. So just tapping on that takes me directly there, even though it's buried in a folder. And the thing that's nice about it is, you know, I've used a shortcut that Federico did for Club MacStories in the past for this kind of thing. But what's nice about the widget is it actually on the widget shows a little preview of the text that you have in that note. So it provides a little additional information. And then in my larger notes widget, it takes me to a folder and shows me the 3 most recent edited notes in that folder. So just a great way to kind of surface content from within other apps that are important to you and bring them to the forefront. I'm using, let's see, what else am I using? I'm using weather, files, just a whole bunch of them. I guess I'm using the news widget too, though I don't know if I really want the news showing up on my home screen all the time because it's not been particularly good lately, but it is an app that I dip into to see the headlines from time to time. So getting those at the right time of day is kind of nice. Another big thing that happened on the site this week was that we published the most recent episode of AppStories, and it was really nice. We got to interview 3 of the Apple Design Award winners, and we had 2 game developers and 1 productivity app developer. We had Maj Tabi, who is one of the principals of Virgin Company that makes Darkroom. Really fascinating discussion with him about his customers and how he approaches design for different types of customers for the app and the evolution of the app from, the time that it became an iPad app to not just an iPhone app and where it's going. Then we also talked to Sam Rosenthal of the game band. Sam made Where Cards Fall, which was one of the launch titles for Apple Arcade. It's a fantastic indie game. It's won all sorts of awards. I highly recommend playing it. We've been following Sam's work for years on MacStories. One of the things that was so hard about not being at WWDC is we always got together at some point with the team at Snowman. Snowman is the publisher of Where Cards Fall. And many times we'd see Sam and we'd talk to Sam and see where things stood as the game was being developed. And it was really great to see it come out with Apple Arcade and then talk to him about the development of the game since because he started it when he was in college. It's like almost a 10-year process. And I think we saw it first maybe 6 or 7 years in. And we also talked to him about things like the role music plays in his development work, which was super fascinating to me. And then our final interview was with Genova Chen. And Genova Chen is the creative director at that game company for the game Sky, Children of the Light. In addition, before that game came out, which is a huge hit on iOS, I think I just read that something like 2 million copies have been downloaded. But he also, before that, he was doing games exclusively on Sony's platform, on the PS4 and the PS3. And he is the maker, of course, of Journey, which is a critically acclaimed game that is a favorite of geeks around the world. And it was really neat to talk to him because unlike Maj and Sam, we did not know him. We had not spoken to him previously. And it was really neat to pick his brain and understand how design plays into creating his games. And the thing is, what fascinated me too about talking to both game designers and app designers is how much overlap there is, how close the processes are for those two things. I think a lot of app developers don't think about games as much as maybe they should, because if you listen to the thought process and what goes on with these games that Sam Rosenthal and Genova Chen explain, a lot of those same principles and ideas are applicable to apps. And so I'd like to see more cross-pollination between those two worlds because they're right there next to each other, but I don't think there's as much crossover as there could be or maybe should be. All right, I want to move on to some of the stories that we did this week on the news. And, of course, as I mentioned before, the public betas came out towards the end of the week. We've got those for iOS, iPadOS, and tvOS. But there was more, too. There's an interesting app that just came out from Epic Games, and it's an iPhone app that uses the selfie camera with the TrueDepth feature and ARKit to capture facial expressions that then are piped directly into the Unreal Engine, which is their game engine for building video games. This is not an app that most MacStories readers will ever download or need to download. But to me, it's really interesting because if this app works like Epic says it works, then it's incredibly democratizing because it's taking an app that you can download for free on the App Store and you can scale it from anything from an indie game developer sitting at their desk by themselves, capturing their facial expressions for characters in their game, all the way up to big stage designs, where there are multiple actors and motion capture suits and all sorts of sophisticated, complex equipment going on, but they're still at the same time capturing those facial expressions using an iPhone. I mean, it's really neat. You should go check out the post and see the original post that's on the Epic Games blog, because it shows, an actor in a motion capture suit with headgear on that has an iPhone kind of hanging out over their face and staring them in the face, capturing their facial expressions as they move around, capturing both the facial expressions and their motions at the same time and feeding them into Unreal Engine. It's absolutely wild, and I think it's a really interesting use of the iPhone in what can be anything from, as I said, a solo developer on up to an incredibly complex production of a game, and worth reading. Also, this week, Apple announced that they have updated their coding resources for students, teachers, and families. And this is something that I've been following along with for a number of years at MacStories. There's a couple of different things here. There's Design with Swift. That's one curriculum that's available. There's also Everyone Can Code. And between the two of them, they kind of cover the entire range of possible students that might be interested in learning how to code. Everything from, young children who are like kindergarten or first grade age, all the way up to university level students. And it captures those students as well as their teachers, allowing people to pick the right point at which to enter the curriculum and learn more about coding with Swift. Of course, you add to that Swift Playgrounds, which is both available on the iPad as well as the Mac now, which is another great learning tool and ties into this. But there's more that came out this week too. For teachers, there's now a professional online course for learning how to teach these different courses, because not all teachers are in a school district where they have the resources for this stuff already. So Apple is providing the guidance to allow teachers to get up to speed to where they can actually teach these courses themselves to students, which I think is a great idea. On top of that, there are new resources available for parents and their kids too, because a lot of people, especially in the United States, are still stuck at home. It's unclear whether all kids will be going back to school in the fall, and this is a resource for parents to kind of help their children learn how to code if that's something they're interested in. I mean, I know for me personally, I have 3 boys. My 2 oldest are college age now. One of them's actually out of college. And when they were younger, I would have loved to have these resources. They're fantastic. The books for all the curricula and all the teacher's guides and everything can all be downloaded for free on the Apple Books app. So, if you are interested in learning how to code, or you have someone in your life who is, it's definitely worth taking a look at these because they're really fantastic resources. All right. I also want to mention too that Omni has updated their roadmap for 2020. The Omni Group typically puts out a roadmap for the year in January, and they did that this year too. And there was a lot of different things on there for various products that they do, and they just put out an update. Part of it is because things have changed. Not only is there a global pandemic, which has put most of their engineers and other people in the organization working from home and potentially, I don't know, maybe slowing them down a little bit, but there's also all the changes that came out of WWDC. And Ken Case, who runs the Omni Group, he explained that the goals are staying exactly the way they always were for this roadmap. And at this point, to just hit a couple of the highlights, Omni Automation is out on all of their apps, which is fantastic. It's a great way to automate things in those apps and between those apps. And OmniPlan, the new version, is about to come out. There's also going to be simplified licensing coming very soon. So those things are all kind of finished or nearly finished. And then moving forward, Omni is going to be taking a close look at how they can adapt OmniFocus and a bunch of their other apps to the new APIs that were announced at WWDC. And particularly what we're talking about here is what's going on with the Mac. With Apple Silicon coming, with Big Sur and all those changes, Omni wants to be at the forefront of that so that their apps stay relevant for the foreseeable future, which I think is great. I wish them luck, and I can't wait to see what they come up with. Okay, let's turn to the club for a minute. First of all, we have a PSA in the most recent issue of MacStories Weekly that addresses MacStories and privacy. We have a privacy policy. Federico and I have talked about it in the past, but it's good to remind people of these things once in a while. And we got a couple of questions from club members recently that we addressed individually with those people, but it seemed like the right time to kind of address it more broadly in respect to the club itself. But I wanted to mention it here simply because we do respect the privacy of our readers. It's very important to us. If you haven't looked at our privacy policy before, I know those things are super boring to read, but ours is actually pretty good in the sense that it's in plain English. So if you ever wonder what's going on, what we track, what we don't, really it's on the site. It's really just Google Analytics so we can see how many people are visiting the site. But if you want all the details, go check it out. I'll have a link in the show notes. Beyond that, though, we had a lot of interesting things in Weekly. We had Ryan, who wrote a story about BookTrack. BookTrack is a book tracking app, as the name suggests, and it was the favorite this week. It's a really neat app. It's really fairly new, but has come a long way in a short time. It's cross-platform, and it also adopts so many of the modern technologies and design principles across all those platforms. Really great app and really great write-up by Ryan about that. I did a story about video apps, iOS video apps, and I wanted to cover in my mind things that are easy to get into. So I covered Darkroom, which is, I think a lot of people still think of as a photo editor, but it recently added video editing in terms of adding filters and things to video. But I also wanted to cover the kinds of apps that people use to post to Instagram stories or TikTok or whatever. So, I also cover things like InShot and Adobe Rush. So it's a good mix of easy, approachable video apps that lets you do a lot of things really quickly and without too much difficulty so you can share them with friends or on social media. We also had the results of our straw poll. We do straw polls of our members every now and then just to kind of get their thoughts on what they think is cool coming out of WWDC, for instance, or what they think is coming down the pike in the future. And so we have the results of those in this issue. And I did a preview of the HyperDrive Gen 2 12-port USB-C hub, which was a Kickstarter project that I backed a long time ago. It got delayed a little bit because of the pandemic, but it arrived this week, and I'm really happy with it. I think the thing that I like most about it, I've got another hub that I use from OWC, which I use with my Mac Mini, but this is kind of dedicated to two things. One is my iPad Pro, and the other is a dock for my Nintendo Switch. What's really nice about this particular hub is it has two HDMI out ports, which allow me to connect both the Switch and the iPad through the hub and to a second HDMI port that's on my display that I use with my Mac Mini at my desk. So that's kind of the main reason I got it. I just thought it would be easier too to have a dedicated hub for my iPad Pro for when I'm using it with SD cards or as or using, my computer display as a secondary monitor, that sort of thing. And so far I like it a lot. I mean, it works as advertised. It's a little chunky, but it also happens to have 12 ports on it, so it's not really a surprise that it's chunky. What's particularly nice, though, is that it fits right underneath my Park Slope stand for my iPad Pro. This is a wedge-style stand that I use from 12 South, and I can tuck it just in the wedge of the triangle so that it's hidden most of the time when my iPad Pro is on the stand, and I can then very easily connect the USB-C cable to the port and have it display on my 4K monitor. So that's been particularly nice. One thing I don't like about it, it has a built-in USB-C cable. It's not removable. It's kind of, the end into the hub is attached to the hub, which is too bad. All right, everybody, let me tell you about our sponsor for this episode and for all of MacStories this week, and that is Offscreen. It is way too easy to get sidetracked and waste your time on your iPhone, but, Offscreen is a screen time management app that lets you understand exactly how you're spending your time, regain control of it, and then learn how to focus on what's most important to you. It's a beautifully designed app that works both with the iPhone and the iPad, and it humanizes the way you track your statistics about your device usage. And what I mean by that is that it's not all just numbers and figures. They're broken down into understandable bite-sized categories of details. Things like pickups or a statistic of the first pickup of the day and how much sleep time you got even, because it can track your sleep and it can track how much you walk each day. It's kind of a holistic outlook on how you spend your time, and it tries to give you the tools kind of balance that better. It also helps you focus on your work because it allows you to set things like Pomodoro timers, countdowns, and even cumulative timers so that you can get a sense for how much you're working and how much you're either goofing off or doing something more useful. Once you start a timer and you put your phone down, off-screen will remind you to get back to work if you pick up your phone with a notification, which is super nice. Of course, too, though, if there are apps that you need for your work that are on your phone, you can whitelist them so you're able to get to them even if you've otherwise used off-screen to try to keep you from using your phone. The app also has terrific white noise options to help you focus and all sorts of reports to get a better handle on where your time is going. So go to MacStories and check out the post that we had on this. I'll have a link in the show notes. It goes into more detail about what you can do with Offscreen, or download it in the App Store. I'm going to put a link to both in the show notes. I want to thank Offscreen again for sponsoring not just this episode of Unwind, but also all of MacStories this week. All right, we don't have Federico to give you a romantic comedy this week. You know that's his favorite thing. I will tell you that he is deep in the midst of watching Gossip Girl, so I'm sure you'll hear about that at some point. But for me, I went with something a little different this week, and I almost hesitate to recommend this only because it's on Amazon Prime, and I'm acutely aware that Amazon Prime is not available in very many parts of the world. Yes, it's in America, it's in Canada. I guess it's in the UK and maybe Germany now. But there are a lot of places that it's not, and I'm sorry if that's the case. Maybe you can find it some other way. But the show that I want to recommend is one that I really enjoyed and just tore right through this week, and it's called Hannah. And this is season 2. Hannah started out as a movie, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and the movie's okay. It's not great. It's good. I mean, you can probably find it. If you can find it for free, I'd try to find it for free and maybe not rent it, but it's pretty good. But the first season of this TV show is really good. I liked it a lot. It follows a young girl who is raised in the woods by her father in Romania. And it's basically one of these action-adventure spy intrigue type of shows because it turns out that Hannah was part of a program where they're doing something to a bunch of babies' DNA to change it and try to build an army of super warriors out of these young girls. It's the kind of plot that sounds a little goofy, but it's really well done here. And I enjoyed season 1. Season 2 came out roughly a week ago. Maybe I guess it was 10 days ago or so on Amazon Prime. And there are 8 episodes, and I think I watched them in over a total of 3 nights. It's just fantastic. I don't want to spoil it. It picks up where the last season left off, and it follows Hannah and these other agents of the government as, people are trying to track her down, and she's trying to save some people that she met in the previous season. And I'm being very vague because I don't want to spoil too much here, but I absolutely loved it. It gets off to a roaring start. There are a couple episodes in the middle that are a little slow. Didn't like them as much, but it kind of redeems itself in the last couple of episodes, and totally loved those as well. So check out Hannah. Fantastic. Also, I hope you enjoyed the show. This is really, honestly, the first time I've ever done a show solo. So hopefully I did an all right job and everybody likes it. But Federico will be back. Don't worry. He'll be back next week. But, that's where we're going to end it for this week. So thanks again to our sponsor this week. That's Offscreen. And we will talk to you next week on MacStories Unwind.
Ciao, John.